Oh, there we are. Hi to the Patreons.
Hi to the Patreon.
That's the sort of quality you get. We love you. We love you.
We do. Cheers, everyone.
Yeah.
I haven't got a drink to toast with, so
I
just
do
hold
have
a phone and imagine.
a wrist strengthener, though.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, when are the World Wanking Championships coming out, Gareth?
They got to exist somewhere.
I'm sure, probably in Norway. Here we go. Hello and welcome to another episode of the O3C podcast, coming to you from O3C Games. My name is Jonathan Dunn, and I'm joined by my excellent friend, one of my oldest, and a certain absolute gaming compatriot, Chris Dow.
Baby powder.
And we are here to chat your ears off about our love of video games.
Yep.
There we go. Right, announcements. You ready?
Yep.
Good morrow, fine ears. Let me tell you about our Patreon page. Despite what you may have come to believe, things cost stuff. Sometimes not a lot of stuff, but some stuff is often required for said things. In this instance, view the podcast as a thing, and Patreon, my friends, is the stuff. There are numerous things that cost us a little bit of stuff in producing and running the podcast and helping the other bits and bobs we're doing, and Patreon is a superb way of helping support us if you are indeed interested and able to do that. Contributions of stuff start from as little as £4 a month, which works out at £1 an episode. And if stuff you do give, things you shall receive, because we will shower you with additional bonus things as a sign of mutual respect for both you and the stuff. Things such as full bonus episodes, exclusive deleted scenes and outtakes, bonus video content, access to our exclusive Discord server, and a new thing for this season are the video counterparts to the episodes, which are unedited and ad-free, so you can see both mine and Chris's faces gormlessly fluff through the episodes and earn a newfound respect for just how much editing is required to make this podcast work. Patreon.com/O3C Games, or go to our website o3c.games, where you can check out our articles, reviews and videos, and also hop over to the support page for links to the Patreon or a one-off donation stuff button via PayPal if subscribing isn't your bag. We thank you.
Cheers.
Right, here we go then. Welcome to episode 3 of season 5 of the O3C podcast, and welcome to the first Fortnite challenge episode of the season as well. If you haven't previously heard, the format of this season is going to see us alternate between coverage of the Playdate and these Fortnite challenge episodes, where me and Chris will report back on a game that the other has set us to play. Typically, it'll be a game that sits outside of our comfort zone, or it might be a game that's passed us by, a retro game that wasn't on a console we owned as a kid. It might just be a walloping curveball. So stay tuned to find out about what were the first games? What's the first batch of games? What did we do? Bleed. Chris set me Bleed to play, and I set Chris Machinarium to play. I'm very much looking forward to reporting back to Chris and telling him to up his game when he challenges me to play another game. Because that game's shit. No, it's not. Cut all of this. I realised I put a full stop at the end of my notes, and that's a danger thing, because that means that section's written and this section was not written. As a reminder of the games that we challenged each other to play, Chris set me the game Bleed, an arcade shoot 'em up, and I challenged Chris to play one of my favourite games in my top 100. It's a point-and-click adventure game, Machinarium.
You did.
Can't wait to find out what you thought of that game, and I'm looking forward to giving you some personal critical feedback on Bleed, which will hopefully inform your choices of what you challenge me to play next.
I was going to say I didn't make it.
For the purposes of this, yes, you did.
Okay.
As you probably know, last week we put out a little filler episode because, unfortunately, both me and Chris found ourselves in hospital for a week, which stalled our plans to record. But
we're back now.
We're back now. We're both alive. We're both fine. I've got some scars. If here's a treat for the Patreon video subscribers. This is what you can get if you subscribe to the Patreon and look at the video counterpart of this episode. You can see these surgical scars.
People are going to pay extra for that.
I mean, oh no. Sorry, force of habit. I was going to take my trousers down. So, what did the last 2 weeks bring us in terms of gaming? Were we able to sit and play more games as we recovered and waited in hospital waiting rooms? I can tell you the case for me was unfortunately not, because as I'm sure you'll attest as well, Chris, the hospital it's a strange place because it exists both as the best place you can be when you're seriously ill, but it's also the worst place you can be to actually get better.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've got nothing but extreme, profound and deep thanks and respect to the NHS and their staff. They're all working themselves tirelessly to the bone to make every scrap of funding stretch as far as possible, with financial support offered to them like thoroughly watered down gruel from the Tory government. So any criticisms I lay are directed firmly at those in charge, not the NHS themselves, and certainly not the staff. I mean, like at the moment, like healthcare in our country feels entirely reactive, and that's, I think, part of the biggest problem we have with the immense stretch that the NHS are experiencing. They have to constantly define which are the most important cases, like which people need to be dealt with before others, which is, of course, like the right way to do it. But there should be more support for the NHS to then support more people at the same time, and God forbid, maybe help people before they end up at a point of crisis. Which I know you've got different. You're going to be coming at it from a slightly different side of the coin, because all I was in for was I needed to have my appendix out. That was it. I mean, I've experienced that wait in hospital surgery. The wait will go on as long as humanly possible. It will go on long past you're emotionally and spiritually broken, right until the point where it feels you could legitimately sue them if they made you wait any longer, and then they'll be like, "Oh yeah, no, we're gonna do it now," and don't. It's fine. Like I knew
put down the phone. You don't need to speak to a lawyer just yet.
Yeah, it's fine. Get off the complaint call. I mean, I knew. I mean, within the first day of me being in hospital, I knew I needed my appendix out. You know, they identified that and told me that, and then they could put me on painkillers and some medication. I was able to make myself fairly comfortable for, however long then. I think it was 3 days how I waited, nil by mouth. And I'd have been all right if they'd have said, look, it's going to be 3 days. You can't eat or drink anything for 3 days. I would have been like, fine, I can pace myself. I can know that's where I'm aiming for.
Yeah.
But just not knowing and just like waiting seemingly endlessly, it just saps you of any sort of enthusiasm for anything, and any sort of hope or optimism. And like, my mood just plummets massively in those, especially as like, I can't eat anything, and I don't know how long I'm not going to be able to eat anything. And then I also got like a ward full of the oldest people you can imagine, like getting the menu shouted at them like 3 times a day. So I did all, like, literally my existence was being so hungry and hearing 30 meals shouted at me like every day. It was horrible. And certainly, I mean, there was this 96-year-old bloke. He was in the ward with me, loudly commentating that he wanted to go home so he could die in peace.
Jeez,
I mean, other zingers he came out with were, I buried my dog's ashes with my wife's ashes.
Christ.
My little brother never saw his father's face. And my little sister in the war, it was the cancer that got her. Back to gaming. I started playing This War of Mine to cheer myself up. No, I didn't. And it's a miserable place. Hospital is a miserable place, and like I said, it's not a place you go to get better. And like the horrible thing about having any sort of like depression or periods of low mood is it sucks the life out of you. Like I was in a position where I could have fairly comfortably sat and just played video games for 3 days. That was like a great opportunity. Like, oh, fantastic! Right, I'll put my feet up. But I just didn't want to. I just didn't really want to do anything. I tried. Like, I brought like my Steam Deck with me, so I could have made some meaningful progress in like Cult of the Lamb or Batman Arkham City, which I got on the go, but I just couldn't be bothered. Like, instead, I just sort of mindlessly play Bonza on my phone, which is it's fairly relaxing, apart from the occasional ad interruption of actual Matt Letizia trying to get me to download the only free Match 3 puzzle game with 0 ads. That's right, 0 ads.
Thank you, Matt.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Matt. I tried to play a few little games, but how are you doing, Chris? How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. It's been a strange chunk of time, a pretty torrid time for both of our health in different ways, and it's just such a strange coalescence that in one 5-day stretch we were both independently hospitalised on our respective corners of the little island.
Yeah.
But, life does move in mysterious ways sometimes. I tried to entertain myself as much as I could in the time I was away. Like, when I was initially taken to hospital over concerns with some chest pains, I genuinely thought I'd be home by tea time. And I was very ill prepared because of that, because I basically said to Georgia, see you in a few hours, like, they just need to do a scan and check me over and then I'll be back. And when things escalated and then I was rushed up to London for some further scans and checks from, down the southeast where I live, it meant that the only entertainment I'd actually brought with me was my play date and my phone, and both of which were looking very suspect when it comes to battery life at that point. Because I'd sat in just the A&E at Margate waiting for these results of this scan, just essentially just endlessly scrolling on my phone and then just dipping in and out of little things on the playdate to try and entertain myself. And just, you could see the battery drip down sort of percent by percent.
See, this is where my original idea that the crank on the playdate should also be an analog charger, like those wind-up radios.
It absolutely should be. It absolutely should be. On the playdate, I started a fresh playthrough of Casual Birder, as I'd got a bit stuck back when the console first arrived, and I'd kind of forgotten what I was supposed to be doing. Like, when we covered it on the episode the other week, I said I hadn't finished it, and when I boosted it up to try and carry on, I was just like, I don't know where I'm going, I don't know what's in my inventory, I don't know what I've taken pictures of and what I haven't. But after an hour or so, I was back to roughly where I had been. I started exploring part of the map I hadn't actually seen at all for some reason, down by the beach and lighthouse area. And it's just quite a cozy place. It's nice how they use dithering to sort of convey shadow in that section. And I just sort of potted about, took some photos. Again, haven't finished it, but made more progress than I did the first time.
Casually birded around.
Exactly. When I was settled up in London, and kind of the worry had subsided, essentially. There was a concern I was going to have some surgery that I didn't have to. So then it was just a case of being monitored for a couple of days before I could be sent home. But at that stage also, I'd been awake for so long that my focus was pretty woolly and I still had a lot of time to kill. It was very hard to sleep in the ward I was in, so I was just there, awake. And I defaulted back to just hammering games of solitaire on the playdate with the side-loaded app, Smolitaire. There's very little to say about it other than it is solitaire, but it was absolutely enough to kill a few hours when laying on the bed, conserving the last 10% of phone battery I had, whilst sniffing out a charger I could borrow from a ward mate or a nurse or just anyone, really. It does have a cool mechanic whereby the crank lets you quickly send cards to the home piles at the top if they're accessible in your stacks. And that's quite satisfying, especially as I was essentially trying to hold off until the very end. So I had just full stacks of cards. So I could try and chain gun all 52 in succession. Nice. And that was something to aim for. Killed an hour.
And when I assume nary a 90s English footballer was to be seen in that game.
There wasn't, but talking about this idea of how ads ruin mobile games, when I was a bit more juiced up, I tried to play a bit of Tetris on my phone.
Yeah. And
I'm not sure who's responsible for the current free-to-play Tetris on mobile, because I downloaded it purely for this occasion. Yeah. But I thought it might have at least been like a serviceable option to kill a few minutes whilst I was just sitting and waiting. This version lets you play a 3-minute game. There's a standard marathon mode. When you reach a certain progress level, there's like a Tetris 99 copying Royale mode. But I never made it that far because, as you've alluded to with Matt Letizia, after every game, you get to watch 2 full minutes of adverts. Jesus. And believe me, that gets old pretty quick, even if you love Tetris.
Even if you love Tetris and you've literally got nothing else to do.
And I was flicking through the different menus and found you could pay to remove ads, which I genuinely would have considered doing at that moment. But it was only for a month, and then they come back
That's
again.
the fucking worst.
They come back again, and it's just such a crying shame that premium games on mobile now have basically been completely bred out of the market because people are so entitled that the economy and value of mobile titles is just utterly destroyed, completely destroyed.
Yeah. I mean, Apple Arcade is still a real beacon in amongst all of that. I mean, I'm still playing Jetpack Joyride 2. They just released The Gardens Between on Apple Arcade, and I've started playing that, and that's a gorgeous little game, you know. And I downloaded a little solitaire game that was on Apple Arcade that was just had a nice little bit of premium polish to it, you know.
Yeah,
I did the job, bit of Spider,
When I was finally home from hospital, and at roughly the time you went in for your own stay,
tag team.
I obviously filled my time with a bit of today's challenge game because I was a bit behind then on playing Machinarium. But I beat one game I'd been playing through on my Steam Deck, and I also started a new game on my Switch briefly as well, which I will tell you all about. Now, on the deck, I beat the now near mythical freeware title. It's a mouthful, this one, called Barkley Shut Up and Jam Gaiden. Now, it is a very old, very silly game that is presented as a canon sequel to both the Mega Drive basketball game Barkley Shut Up and Jam and the film Space Jam. Brilliant. And in it, you play as Charles Barkley, NBA superstar, and it's a parody RPG, but one that is played completely straight. And that really is the joke throughout the whole thing.
Brilliant.
Now, I won't spoil any of the story because pretty much all of the game's humour relies on you buying into the game world's utterly dumb premise and just accepting terms like the chaos dunk that destroyed half the world as just like, oh, that's what happened. But I will say it's a genuine laugh from start to finish. It pokes fun at the material it's pretending to iterate on really well. It also pokes fun at kind of the po-faced JRPGs that present these sort of storylines of just absolute nonsense without batting an eyelid. One thing I was concerned about is this was obviously a game that launched in the mid-2000s, and I was sort of worried that it would have that kind of edgelord internet humour that makes a lot of this era's media somewhat problematic when trying to view it 15 or 20 years into the future. But if you think back to that time period, the number of films chucked out, mainly by the Farrelly brothers, if we're being honest, they're just unwatchable these days. If you've got any semblance of like modern social or political awareness at all, it's quite startling. And I was really worried that having not played this game when it was contemporary, it might fall into that category. There are a few misfires that do kind of date it. You know, there's things that make you feel a bit uncomfortable, like the status effects in battle. They're all named after like medical conditions and disabilities, which is, you know, pretty ableist if we're looking at it now. Yeah. But in execution, it's not really that much worse than any of the type of jokes that South Park is still making today as like a point of comparison. It also, and this one is a bit more iffy, it centers a whole quest line on taking down a character unfortunately based around Bill Cosby. Ooh. And although it's hard to know how much anyone was aware of his behavior and misdeeds back when it was being developed by 3 people in the early 2000s, when we view it today, pretty icky, but you know, you can balance these things out. Overall,
just play Michael Jackson's Moonwalker and help Michael Jackson rescue children.
Overall, though, it's a brisk, like we're talking 5 or 6 hours all in, genuinely amusing RPG. It's linear by choice. It's about getting through the story. It's about just, you know, appreciating the jokes as they come. And it really effectively pokes fun at the genre, at the kind of RPG maker culture of kind of online communities, and also in kind of the stock we place in esoteric media like Space Jam, I guess. And it really did make me laugh. There was a lot of points that I thought were genuinely laugh out loud funny. Now, I played this on the Steam Deck, and then I'll come back to you. I played this on the Steam Deck, but as a word of warning to anyone wanting to do the same, be prepared to get so deep into the inner workings of Linux, Proton, and Wine compatibility to make this one play. Like the challenge of getting this up and running easily took longer than actually beating the game in sheer hourage.
That's the real game for you, though, isn't it? You love it.
Loved
You're
it.
Mad for that stuff.
Because it's every time someone says it just doesn't work. You know, I find an old message board that's like, oh, you know, it's not really compatible in Linux because of X, Y, and Z. I'm like, but I reckon it could be. It could be. And I just carried on going. But if you are genuinely interested in playing it, anyone out there, just do yourself a favour and play it on the PC or Mac. Like it runs on any machine. You don't need to play it on the Steam Deck. It's not a problem.
Yeah. speaking of funny, silly games that poke fun at things, I was like rummaging through my Steam Deck, like trying to find something, not even really knowing what I wanted to play, but just like, oh, that's installed, I'll give that a go. And I played a game called Procession to Calvary.
Oh, I've not played it. I've seen pictures.
So, yeah. So it's a comedy point and click game done in the style of like Monty Python animation, essentially.
Yeah.
It is pretty funny and full of sort of very silly animation and pithy jokes. It's also full of the frustrations that are rife in the lesser point and click games, which is lack of precision, an overabundance of trial and error problem solving. It's the sort of game that I would probably enjoy watching a let's play of. So I could just skip all of that faff and just enjoy the humor. But I don't have time to go through all of that crap myself. And speaking of retro games, I did have a rummage around my emulation library and failed to choose from the thousands of games at my fingertips, with which one might hold my attention as I have sort of going into my third day of nil by mouth.
The old Netflix problem, isn't it?
It is. It really, really is. I did end up playing a couple of hours of James Bond 007 on the Game Boy.
Nice.
Yeah, it is a stone cold good game. It really is. It's ahead of its time. It really is, and it's a classic. I'm enjoying that. I might not go back to it, but I enjoyed it. It did, filled a couple of hours.
Yeah.
And I managed to fill another hour or two with Star Fox Adventures on the GameCube, which is a game that came up in discussion in our Discord server, and that was fun. It was fun, but it's got weird controls because it's still hadn't really quite figured out proper good 3D camera controls for third person stuff and combat and all of that stuff, and it just felt a little bit weird in the modern context, and I couldn't be bothered to faff around with configurations to get it smoother. But I would like to play through it again, because it is I'm very fond of that game, and it's a good Zelda-like. So I might, when I've got a little bit more resilience, get into it and tweak some of those controls and give it a proper go. I've still got 2 games to talk about.
Do you want me to just chuck this small one in here? It's like a paragraph, and then you can go back to it.
Yeah. But you said you'd picked up a new game.
I have, and it's one that you are a fan of as well. Because on Switch, I started Alto's Collection, the lovely little pairing of Alto's Journey and Alto's Odyssey.
How absolutely wonderful. A little shout out, actually, to somebody who reached out to us on Instagram to say that they really enjoyed listening to our mental health well-being special, which is the episode where I talked about Alto's Adventure and Alto's Odyssey.
It was.
Timely.
It's one of those game series that's been in the back of my head pretty much since then, that I think I was aware of them but hadn't played them. I do own an iPad that I use very infrequently, so I'd never kind of installed them or tried to sort of play, via the Apple device I had. And they may or may not be on Android, but I just never picked them up kind of thing. But they're endless runners. They look really lovely on mobile. They look just as nice here, playing on a big screen with the Switch or via the OLED display if you're playing in handheld. And they're just nice single button score attacks with that kind of genre standard of refreshing goals when you hit certain milestones and, amassing scores and collectibles across single or cumulative runs. And I've just had a really, really nice time. It's kind of exactly what I wanted when I picked it up. Just something that I didn't have to commit a lot of real thought to, but if I wanted to, I could play for quite a long time. I get very into this sort of stuff in the same way that I know you have with Jetpack Joyride. Yeah. Like, it took a little while to get the hang of the rotation system for flips and tricks. There was a slight learning curve to understand when you're supposed to jump when you approach a ramp, because I kept sort of jumping at the peak and just flying into the wall of a chasm. But as soon as you kind of commit some of these things to muscle memory, lovely. 10 out of 10. Love them. Really, really nice.
Excellent. I'm really, really glad. They are, really, really lovely games. Very comforting. Very simple, very moving. I've never played them on anything bigger than an iPhone.
You should.
And I really would like to play it on like my big 4K OLED TV downstairs. I think that'd be
tasty.
In fact, I can because I've got them on, because I've got Apple Arcade on my Apple TV, so I can just play it with an Apple remote.
It'll be good.
Wow, somebody's in for a treat tomorrow. Me. So I did, when I got out of hospital, I decided to pick up a couple of brand new games to try and sort of get me out of my funk a little bit. And I picked up 2 actual physical games that I could enjoy unwrapping and
Oh,
putting into
in a box.
a console and playing in a box and everything. First of which, on the Switch, was Sonic Colors Ultimate, which had been on my list after my little Sonic Fest that I had a few weeks back.
The binge.
And I'd heard, yeah. I wonder, where does appendicitis come from? Turns out, don't play too many Sonic games. It's the only evidence I've got to go on, but you can't argue with it.
No, can't argue with science.
I'd heard only good things about Sonic Colors, saying it was the best 3D Sonic game. That the remaster was great. It looked nice and fun and colourful. I mean, it may be the best 3D Sonic game, but that's kind of like saying I had the best appendix in the appendectomy ward, or Jeremy Hunt is the best MP in Liz Truss's cabinet. It's not much of a compliment if everything around it is a literal stinking pile of human entrails.
No, the best piece of shit is still a piece of shit, isn't it?
You missed my joke. You missed my joke. Right. It's not much of a compliment if everything around it is a literal stinking pile of human entrails, or it's a selection of burst appendices.
Hey!
That's very harsh when it comes to Sonic Colors, because it's an absolutely adequate game. But I've just got so little interest in playing it through to completion.
Yeah.
There are moments of fun, but also so many moments of painfully imprecise, like, platforming action. I remember when I first played the Spider-Man game, I said I was really concerned that the speed and the fluidity that you sort of go through the air in, like, Spider-Man mode, like when you sort of stopped and landed and had to do something a bit more slow, that would, like, really jar. But it doesn't at all. It, like, seamlessly goes to very, very different sort of movement mechanics. Whereas something like Sonic Colors, going from, like, fast 3D stuff to then you stop all of a sudden, or if you get hit or something, and then you've got to do a little bit of platforming to get back on a straight, it feels fucking awful.
Yeah.
It's horrid.
Yeah,
Absolutely horrid. And genuinely, because I spent a fair bit of time playing Sonic Generations, the 3D levels in Sonic Generations are much better.
Yeah.
Much better than Sonic Colors. I'll keep on plugging away my support for Sonic Generations to anyone who'll listen, because that is a really, really good game. So yeah, Sonic Colors is going straight back to the shop, I think. Trade that one back in, but there we go. The other game I picked up, because we don't want this podcast to become too niche or too highbrow, so I did pick up FIFA 23, and that game is also fine.
Yeah,
it's got some little updates. Some of them are quite nice. They've got a new system for taking corners and free kicks that, for me, feels better than it's ever done. It seems like that is a function that EA have changed every year, with no real consistency in terms of, like, why they're changing it, or they're not like tweaking a system. They're just going like, that didn't work, let's do this. That didn't work, let's do this. Maybe you just have to do rock, paper, scissors. I don't know, let's try this. And I don't know why they haven't landed on, like, just a suitable solution, or even like an option to say, like, you can just select it on an option to say, I want to do this style of free kicks, or this style of free kicks, or this style of free kicks. If you want to do something like a 3-click system, like in a golf game, or you want to sort of actually, like, physically sort of map where you want your where you want the spin to go, or whether you want it to be purely driven by analog stick or something like that. Just give us the options. Just give us the options, and then we can choose. Because this, for me, feels like infinitely better than any way they've had it for years.
They'll change it next season.
Almost certainly. Well, they're just going to change everything else to EA Sports FC, whatever that looks like. We'll see. We'll see. I wouldn't be surprised if they went more down the subscription service route, like what Pro Evo's done with eFootball.
Possibly.
But then also, I mean, FIFA are making unbelievable amounts of... EA are making unbelievable amounts of money with FIFA, selling a £70 premium game and then rinsing everybody for microtransactions for their Ultimate Team collections. So they're not going to be any rush to not do that.
Yeah.
And it's not like I mean, I don't know what the servers are like for eFootball. Is that what it's called?
I think so. I've never given it any time at all.
I'm sure it's better than it was when it was released, but I'm sure given the fact that I don't know, it's clearly not holding a candle to FIFA. So I'm sure they're not going to be in any rush to change too much. But I've got 3 careers on the go now in FIFA 23. One with a create your own team where I've tried to replicate my 5-a-side team, who unfortunately I'm not going to be able to play with for a fair few weeks whilst I recover. So that's quite fun. So I've got Jaffa Kicks playing there.
Good name. Good name.
It's pretty. It's decent, isn't it? I've got another career going playing as Arsenal, obviously. Although this is the first time playing as Arsenal hasn't felt as good as watching them play. There've been like a few times when I'm controlling certain players where I'm like, I want them to do something I know they could do in real life, but like their digital counterpart literally won't play ball. But then, and the squad didn't really need any tweaking, which is the other thing. Although I did sell Nketiah immediately.
Poor old Eddie. Poor old Eddie.
Poor old B Team Eddie.
Yeah.
I bought Alexander Isak over as a striking companion for Jesus. Although I was just tempted to get Olivier Giroud back.
I love him
because he's like statistically, he's got to be one of the most successful footballers of all time. If you look at the different trophies he's won, he's won them all. He's won them absolutely
he's had
all.
a good career.
I love him, and nobody has ever looked better doing it. The other career I have is with the brilliantly realised AFC Richmond team that's included in the game from the TV show Ted Lasso. And you can even choose Ted Lasso as your manager. So you've got the Marlborough man on the sidelines in his sweater vest to complete the vision. So that's a hoot. I'm enjoying bringing in some real players into that squad to add some youth potential. The weird thing is that there doesn't seem to be commentary included for the team. They're just referring to all of the players in very generic, vague terms, which is weird. But then also once the commentator did just say, "Oh, and it's Jamie Tart." So I don't know if there's a software glitch and the content is in there, because it does feel like an easier job to put the names in the commentary bank than recreate a dozen actors' likenesses and a fictional football round.
Yeah.
But that's FIFA, isn't it?
That's EA. That's how they spend their money.
It's crazy. Yeah, I mean, essentially, all these games are just annual patches, aren't they? Paying £70 for an annual patch, but. Yeah, it does mean that, the good thing about them being, FIFA still being a premium game is that it's not massively ramming the e-commerce stuff down your throat while you're paying for for the single player stuff, because like you can feel that stuff bubbling underneath the surface, and I'm sure that like obviously if EA Sports FC goes free to play, then EA is going to just make you fully aware of all the things you can buy at every possible occasion. Hopefully they won't do that, but it's always going to be, it feels hard. I don't know. It's hard to feel like you've got your money's worth with a FIFA game. If you're not playing online and playing in all of that stuff. But certainly whilst I'm unable to play football for a fair few weeks, it will be a nice way to scratch that itch. A little bit of fun, and play a few matches here and there. It's FIFA,
football, isn't it?
It's the last FIFA game, so I'll keep it. I'll keep that on my shelf next to FIFA 96. Which I think I sold.
Oh, Jonathan. It would have gone for about £2 as well. So
It did, yeah. Once I found out you can listen to the Motson rap on YouTube, I had no need for the disc anymore. Yeah. So here we go. Fortnite challenge time.
Yeah.
What game did you challenge me?
I challenged you to play Bleed, an old Xbox Live indie game, reborn across pretty much every modern platform.
Great. We didn't really figure out how we were going to do this, did
That's
we?
right. Are you going first?
Right.
Am I going first? What do you want to do?
I've just been talking for a little while, so let's just rewind a minute. What we say? So it is Fortnite challenge report time. Oh, you love it. You love it. It's like teacher's evening, teacher's night. What do you call it? Parent-teacher
Something
evening?
like that.
Staff night? Conference?
Staff bonanza? Party
Staff
night?
bonanza? Yeah.
Parent-teacher fun time?
Get pissed, try not to throw up on a child night. One of those.
Don't photocopy anyone's bums.
Usually. 2 weeks ago, Chris set me the challenge to play Bleed, little arcade game. I'm going to tell you what I thought of that in a minute. But first of all, I want to hear what Chris has made of the game that I recommended to him, which was Machinarium. Machinarium is a beautiful little point and click puzzle adventure game. I played it on the PC, but it's available on mobiles. It's available on everything. I think you've got it on Switch.
I do.
And I loved it so much that it is included in my top 100 games of all time. And yeah, I really, really hoped that you would find that little something special that I got from it and enjoy it as well. So yeah, tell me how you got on with Machinarium.
Well, this is a game that I had 10 minutes of experience with previously. So I knew of it. I played the very first bit. And it's another casualty, or had been a casualty, of this terrible thing I have for starting and dropping games. And I've said this quite a lot of times on the podcast before. There's probably two main reasons why I so readily play something for 5 minutes and then, despite enjoying it, just choose to move on. One, because I have a lot of other games constantly vying for attention. And two, which is something I've definitely mentioned before, I have this almost anxiety about keeping abreast of all games. And it's such a fool's errand, but my brain is desperate to maintain this cross-genre, cross-cultural spread of everything within interactive media. And it means that sometimes I drop things that I'm genuinely enjoying because I'm worried there's other things I'm supposed to be enjoying at the same time. Like it's...
Big Bobby Car doesn't play
It doesn't. It's not a healthy way to approach anything, but this is unfortunately how my brain it seems to be wired. Now, I bring this up mainly because, like I said, I played Machinarium for 10 minutes a very long time ago when I used to write for a games website called Negative Gamer. And back then I was furnished with a Steam key. It was about the first review copy I ever got of anything. And I really enjoyed the first 10 minutes. And then did I persevere beyond that? No. No. And having this game set as my Fortnite play challenge this last couple of weeks has meant that I was forced to actually make time for it. And to sit down with it, I actually made some progress with it. And I'm probably about 3/4 of the way through, I would say. Maybe further, because I don't really know where the end is. But I get that impression. Now, as you've already alluded to, it is a traditional point-and-click game. It's refreshed slightly from the LucasArts format of old by being wordless. And all of the communication with NPCs takes place pictorially. And the other thing that's really important and quite different from a lot of those older games is that the movement and position of your character, Joseph, this little robot, has this additional import due to objects only being interactable when they are in physical reach of your character and his little robot arms. And this is all set out quite early on with characters you meet shouting at you in little animated speech bubbles that are really nicely drawn and really nicely kind of animated. And initial puzzles easing you into the game's world by asking you to think not only about your horizontal position across the screen, but also about your vertical position, as Joseph has this additional ability to extend his body up or down to interact with things that are higher or lower than him. Now, the first little niggle, and this basically comes down to playing this on the Switch, is a big part of it, I think, is that although the experience is largely the same as it would be on a computer, the fact that I'm holding a controller in my hand has really made me yearn for some direct control. And you are able to move a cursor around with the left analog stick. You can then extend or contract your little robot body using the right analog stick. So you've got some, agency over him. But I frequently, even like 2, 3, 4 hours into playing this game, would click on things out of reach and found myself confused for just a bit longer than I'd like before I realised that it's not going to work because I haven't moved Joseph there. You know, the solution I had was probably right, but my position in relation to the thing was wrong. So he'd go, and tell me no. And then I was like, why? You've got the item in your hand. You're holding the thing you need. Just go and put it in the place. And it's like, no, walk him there first, then do the item. It's stuff like that sort of had little problems.
I can imagine that would be frustrating.
Now, some weeks ago, I mentioned another game called Brock the Investigator on Steam. And that was that hybrid point and click and brawler sort of mishmash game. Yeah. And it used this nice system where you could click on any area of the screen and use your mouse as you would do in a regular point and click game. But you could also control your character with the arrow keys if you're using a keyboard, or using an analog stick if you're playing it with a controller. And having that kind of direct control worked really, really nicely. And it's the type of thing that I think Machinarium would have felt smoother if that had been implemented when it got ported to consoles. You know, it's a small thing, but it meant kind of there was that level of mild frustration sometimes with how I was getting around. Now, one thing I cannot complain about is the aesthetic of this game. because everything here is really, really beautiful. Like, it's hand drawn, it's likely been hand coloured too. And then, everything is hand drawn, likely been hand coloured too, and all kind of animated really nicely. I think on its initial release on the PC, I'm pretty confident it was made using Flash, as the developer Amanita made their name by creating smaller artsy Flash adventure games in the Samarost series for browsers. And whilst this engine has obviously been updated, it's not running in Flash now for the game's more modern releases. There's definitely some Flash markers, I think, in the game's design and the way in which characters are kind of articulated and posed. In terms of the game's look, doing well today. In terms of the game's look, it's pretty much timeless because it's hand rendered. And yet it also communicates this certain 2000s charm in the way that Joseph and his robot peers are moving and being, their points of reticulation and everything else. And it's just very, very pretty to look at. It also sounds lovely. And I remember when it appeared in your top 100 list, you talked pretty extensively about the soundtrack, and rightly so, because it's a really fantastic mix of soft, almost ambient electronic soundscapes in places, and then more playful, characterful pieces when it's kind of in a scene that might have other robots and other kind of people bopping around. It feels both modern, but also very much of its country of origin, because it's got these melodies and sound fonts that just sound unfamiliar enough to remind you that Amanita are a Czech development studio, and I assume the composer is too. I didn't research who that was, but I know you.
Thomas Dvorak.
That sounds Czech.
Yeah. Hang on.
I mean, how many additional symbols are appended to the letters of his name?
Well, he's not the first one to come up, because that's a Olympic athlete called Thomas Dvorak, who's an athlete from the Czech Republic.
Still Czech though. Still Czech.
But yeah, it's quite a common name. There we go. That's one of the Patreons.
So, in one section, there's a little radio on screen, and it's playing this sort of bossa nova loop. And despite being the type of thing that could get quite annoying when you're stuck on a puzzle in that area for some time, it never wound me up. And it even elicited the golden Georgia response of, "Oh, I like this music." So, if nothing else, regardless of my opinion, Machinarium 1, Lumines 0 on the Georgia scale. Now, excellent. The meat and potatoes of the game. Point-and-click games obviously live or die by their puzzles, and Machinarium is obviously no exception, because it is a point-and-click puzzle game. I don't know if I've got thicker as I've got older, or if my progress through games like Full Throttle or Sam & Max as a kid was mainly down to just sheer perseverance and bloody-mindedness. Yeah, exactly. But I found some of these games' challenges really quite tough. And the early game is mostly fine, as the puzzles are generally isolated to kind of one or two screens at most. So you're only ever really thinking, okay, well, what's in screen A that I could use in screen B? Or how does pressing this button manipulate my immediate surroundings? But a couple of hours in, puzzles start spanning multiple scenes. You're starting to think about, okay, well, what can I do with X on one screen that might do something to Y on another screen? And then maybe I could merge that with Z in my inventory. And there's kind of more moving parts to think about. And I don't have a problem at all with more layered point-and-click puzzles like this. But I think this is an area where the lack of speech or text makes things more difficult. Because in a game like Monkey Island, for example, puzzle solutions can be incredibly esoteric, but most items come with kind of a number of stock lines from your character, Guybrush, that can help you see objects in a more abstract way. Or you might be talking to NPCs that are essentially hiding little hints in their dialogue trees, which aim to light a little fire in the back of your mind as to what you might need to find and where you might need to use it. And in Machinarium, because a character's speech bubble often will just show maybe a single item, that will be enough to trigger a memory of something if you've seen it, if you've noticed it in the background of another scene. But sometimes it's not. And because it's all hand-drawn, it's not always obvious kind of what you're looking for, what can I grab, and what is just part of the painted background. And because of that, there were times when I'd missed part of essentially like a constituent puzzle chain, something I should have come across and then hadn't. And it made it more challenging than it needed to be. So one puzzle in particular, case in point, and apologies if this spoils things for a nearly 15-year-old game. You can skip the next couple minutes if you're desperate to play it tonight. At one stage, I needed to take Joseph through a section of the stage under a leaky pipe, and he wouldn't walk through because of the water. Right next to that is an NPC holding an umbrella. Talking to them, a speech bubble pops up showing that they're missing their dog. So you think, okay, well, I've got to find the dog to exchange for this umbrella. and you find the dog quite quickly on the other side of a little waterway that you can't get across to. Now, through a few puzzles and simple manipulation of the environment, you can draw the dog to the edge of their side of the stage, which felt like, okay, I need him closer to be able to grab him in some way, but you don't have an immediate way to grab him. If you click on Joseph, he gives you a little thought bubble of what looks like a plunger gun, an item that thus far had never featured in the game. So I was like, okay, that's what I need, obviously, but it hasn't come up yet.
Usually thinking about those
Yeah,
things.
yeah,
anyway,
of course.
Like,
So at this stage, I started trawling back through previous screens, looking for any hint I could as to what or where this mysterious gun was. The chain of events that eventually led to solving this puzzle, and this is where I got particularly lost, you needed to turn off a light switch. The light switch itself was maybe 1 pixel wide in a previous room, which makes that room dark and reveals a glow-in-the-dark clock, which shows a specific time. That time can then be used to unlock a door in another area. Solving a Professor Layton-style logic puzzle will then unlock a safe, revealing a gun itself. But there's no plunger, because the plunger is glued to the roof of another room, which you can only get by extending upwards and then grabbing it. And it's something that I'd seen, but I'd wrongly assumed was just a broken light fixture, because again, it felt like it was just painted into the scene. And I feel like if this was a more traditional point-and-click game, someone would have alluded to time being important. So I would have started looking at this clock in a different way. Or maybe your character would have complained about how dark or light a room was to get you to think about illumination in some way as a possible solution to kind of like how to change the environment or the scenario you're in. Or maybe someone would have made reference to the plunger, probably just as a throwaway joke at the time, but that would have been enough to make you think, oh, no, I have seen a plunger, because old dude down on the side mentioned it being stuck to the ceiling, and that was a funny little joke, and it's something that would just be embedded.
Plungers are funny.
Can be. So it does. Now, Machinarium's puzzles are not always this layered, but this one in particular felt overly challenging as a direct result of what the game had chosen to give or not give me, as it were. It does have a really nice hint system. So the game itself is wired to support you in some way as well with this hint system. And if you want to use it, it's there. But I generally try my very best to play a game without taking on these extra bits, without kind of like having that help. And I've often been quite reticent to resort to any sort of crutch. Like if you think about Elden Ring, I was so desperate to beat a boss without summoning anything. I did give in the end, but I wanted to experience like what was this get good mentality that seemed to have driven the discourse for so long. It's the reason I don't generally change difficulty in action games. So something like Resident Evil 4, I could make it a bit easier. Maybe I'd get a tiny bit further. But in my head, it's like, well, normal's the one it gives you when you boot it up. So that's how I feel I should play it. And in retro games as well, I very, very rarely use any modern tools like save states or being able to rewind, even though they're there to be accessible options, because I just want to see what these games were like in the way they were originally presented. So in Machinarium, the hint tool is there. But as a puzzle game, being about puzzles, I tried to avoid it as much as possible. But I did have to use it for this fucking clock plunger dog puzzle. Now, in Machinarium, there's 2 levels of hints as well. It's quite a deep system in a way. The first just gives you an abstract thought bubble to try and nudge you in the right direction. And here, it just showed me, again, the plunger gun, but this time extending across the water in case I hadn't figured that part out, that I was supposed to get the dog using the gun. The second hint, which is different, asks first that you have to play a short 30-second shooting minigame, and then it will unlock a full page of lovely concept art, like pencil drawings of all the pieces of a puzzle in sort of like storyboard form.
Lovely.
And I was like, oh, fantastic. It's really nice to look at. I can sort of work out what I've done and what I haven't done and find out what I've missed or where I've gone wrong. But this other little blip, it was useless because I'd solved everything in that specific area. And the hint pages only show you what to do in that particular scene. So short of going to every scene I had access to, playing the 30-second minigame, seeing what I'd missed in those puzzle pages, it wasn't going to help. It wasn't going to be helpful. So it ended up being kind of form over function, that it looked beautiful, as with everything in the game. And
I'd forgotten about that, actually. It is a really, really lovely system, which gives it away that I absolutely use those at some point, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it looks lovely as with everything in the game. And I really appreciated having to do a little extra work for the hint, because it made me feel like, no, it is there. It's a tool that's there to be used. You know, I'm not being penalised for it. But it's kind of that extra 30 seconds that just makes you sit back and think like, okay, well, as I'm playing this little game, have I missed something really obvious? It's like just that sort of extra bit of thinking time before you're actually given potentially the solution. But in this case, like I said, I did have to Google what I was supposed to do with this clock and plunger and everything else because I couldn't figure it out. But I really like the game.
There's no way in hell I got through my first playthrough of the game without Googling something. Obviously, that's the only playthrough that actually matters with a puzzle game, because then you know all the answers. Although I have played through it several times.
Yeah, I mean, I really like the game, and what you've said there is, I enjoy spending time in this world more than I necessarily do engaging with it. I think because just being in these places, listening to the music, just basically zooming in and out of the artwork, because you can do that with the shoulder buttons just to look closer. It's really nicely drawn. It's just really nice, sort of, little dioramas essentially of these little scenes. I really like the character designs. I really love the music. I really adore the art. But I'm so with the actual puzzle mechanics, I guess. The control, which was a little bit awkward, take it or leave it. Some people will have more of a problem with that than others, but it's not a big deal. But in terms of the actual structure of the game itself, those are those bits that I think there's things that could be done to make it smoother. And in terms of puzzles, I reckon I could have solved most of that, even if it only had kind of a button which would light up all the hotspots of a scene. If I knew I could interact with a light switch, I would have at least pressed it to see what happens, kind of thing. Or perhaps if the hint system was a bit more direct and acknowledged like multi-screen puzzles, make me play 3 levels of a game if it's a harder puzzle. I don't really mind. But just something that kind of acknowledges that, yes, you've solved this bit on this screen, but that's not going to help you for the bit you're stuck on. You do something else. There's every possibility that Amanita went on to refine all this stuff in their other games, because they made a Samaros 3 post Machinarium. They made Botanicula, another game that I've...
Yeah, that's a nice little game.
I've never played them, but I imagine things were probably adapted slightly or refined as they went forwards, because they're still going. They're still making things.
Yeah, there's a Apple Arcade exclusive, Creeks.
Oh, is that them as well? Did they make Creeks as well?
I think so. Which I'm sure is on other things now as well. Creeks.
Well, potentially another one to look at, because I think that's in my Switch collection too.
Almost certainly. I haven't played it, but yeah.
I'll put it on the list. But yeah, so I've not finished the whole game. I think I'm close, like I said. I think I'm about 3/4 of the way through. I've spent a fair few evenings sat with a single puzzle, like, for instance, the plunger adventure, for example. And because I was making minimal progress, what I'd tend to do is I'd come back another day and see if I could then solve it then. And because of that, it's meant that it's not been the sort of game I wanted to just sit with for 5 straight hours on a Saturday. But I do want to get to the end. It is something that I'm close enough. I think I would like to see it out. I've just passed through the greenhouse section, which, as you alluded to, I think all the way back when it came up on your list, has some really wonderful electronic ambient music that sets the tone of that area really nicely. And I'm now through there, and I'm in an arcade, essentially trying to solve Sokoban style puzzles to unlock another item that presumably will help me along on my way. So I will let you know in a week or so if I have got to the end. Because it'd be nice to kind of add to my completion checklist something that otherwise really wouldn't have of pinged up on my to-do list, as it were.
Good. This is exactly why we do this section. Excellent. I'm really glad. And it sounds like you've gotten a lot out. You've highlighted a lot of the things that made the game really, really nice, really special for me. And I think... I'd be interested to see, because as soon as I finished it the first time, I just played through it again straight away, and just played through it just because I knew obviously all the solutions. They're all fairly sort of, fresh in my mind, and it's just lovely. It's just really satisfying to do that and to play through it. I'll be interested to see if you get the same sort of itch when you finish to go, you know what, I'm just gonna breeze through it again just to experience it. Yeah. Lovely.
What about you? What have you played? Which game did I set you? Bleed,
Chris. Bleed. It's a fun little game.
I mean, I haven't played it, like I mentioned before, since it came out on Xbox Live Indie Games, which was a long time ago.
Well, remind me what the game is.
It is a run and gun style sort of arcade shooter, I guess, in the vein of something like Gunstar Heroes is probably the closest sort of analog, that kind of style. It's a twin stick game as well, isn't it? I'm pretty sure you can shoot in different directions. So you have a bit more agency than, say, Contra. But it's that kind of thing.
It's that kind of thing. It's that kind of thing. Now, I was playing this on Steam Deck because I managed to pick it up for about £1.19 or something. So yeah, it's not bad. It's not bad. I mean, I could tell from the moment I started that it wasn't going to be a long game. It all felt very immediate, perhaps a little too immediate, because it just sort of just throws you into the game without really showing you like what makes the game different to other games in similar genres. Like it would have been nice to have had a little, even just a little tutorial section to show you how the triple jump mechanic works, because that's quite different to anything else I've played. The fact that you get 3 jumps, but your third jump is more of a, I don't know, it's more of a sort of like a jet propulsion thing. So it's not like you can jump twice in the air. It's you can jump and then you can do another thing, sort of like, you know, in Smash Brothers. You can jump and then there's always like an up B move that boosts your character a little bit differently depending on your characters. Like with Link, it will do like an upwards sword swing, or like Kirby will do like I don't know, something else. It feels more like that, but because of this, like this strange sort of like movement mechanic, he's gone. Chris has just disappeared. Let's wait for him to come back. Do 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 do. What's happened here then? Chris has had a power cut. If you're watching this, he'll be back as soon as he can. In the meantime, please say the audio is safe. I'm sure it is. I'm sure it's probably fine. I'm actually gonna. No, I'm not. I'm just gonna. Do I stop? What do I do? Media.
And then it was just me looking at a black screen, going "fuck, fuck."
Wish I could have seen it. Wish I could have seen it.
Yeah, it's not going to be.
There we go. Right.
Lost. Okay.
Where did we get to?
Boy.
I was talking about bleed. Okay. And this sort of double, triple jump movement mechanic is kind of what makes the game different to something else, because it's a sort of hybrid between like a standard, I guess, space shoot 'em up where you can just move freely on the X and Y axis as you go along, and it's a mix between that and obviously controlling a character reacting to gravity, which you would expect in like a run and gun game. And I don't really feel the game sort of definitively comes down on a decision on what it wants to be, because there's like this, the sort of nimble jumping and movement mechanics make it feel reminiscent of something like Celeste, but then it doesn't have any of the sort of platforming design to really make the most of those mechanics. And because like your jump and double jump stuff, it recharges, I think, when like you're like wall jumping or bouncing off a wall, in amongst all the chaos of the action and all of the bullet hell sort of bits and bobs going on, you just sort of get a bit lost in all of that. And if you're just jumping around, you can just keep jumping. Basically, your odds are you'll jump off a wall before you've jumped 3 times in the air. So you can just sort of, so you sort of lose the precision of that. And it makes the design of that feel more woolly than intentional. But it does. So like in the main sort of levels, you are just sort of, it is sort of run and gun, avoid some bullet hell stuff, try and kill things without dying. The boss fights, on the other hand, it does feel then more engaging with this movement mechanic, because they're big bosses. They've got sort of long reach attacks, so you really need to be able to move as far and as fast as you can to escape them. And those felt really, really good. Like they reminded me of the boss fights in Dead Cells, actually, which is a big compliment, because those are fantastic. Like, it feels, I don't know, it feels like the game hasn't had an enormous amount of, I don't know, unless, I don't want to be harsh, but it doesn't feel like it's had a huge amount of test playing to get the balance of it right. It's absolutely fine. It's like by no means a bad game, or it doesn't even feel bad to play. It's just that I was very aware of how much better it could be, because I've played games that feel better, that are doing similar things, like little things like just getting the flow of the game feeling right. Like the way checkpointing works in the game, which, I mean, the checkpoints are quite forgiving. If you die, you just go back to the start of that section of the level. It's never a huge, long sort of chunk that you need to get through. But they do kind of ruin the pace of the game, because they're too far apart to be the sort of rapid fire, live, die, repeat thing of something like Hotline Miami or Celeste. And I think that, like, something as simple, like you don't get health drops in the game, and that's a strange decision, I think, because if you were getting if enemies dropped health, or there were health pickups that you could get, that would have just helped the flow of the game so much better. Because as it is, like, by the time you get to a boss fight, almost certainly you're not going to be at full health, so you may as well just die, because you're going to start the boss fight straight away again with full health. Yeah. And I understand that there are difficulty, sort of stacking difficulty tiers with the game. So you can, like the harder difficulty levels, the harder difficulty settings, you haven't got infinite lives, or you haven't got infinite checkpoints, or, you know, all of this sort of stuff. So I understand that there's a sort of layeredness to how that's done, to sort of try and cater for everyone. But like I said, I've seen it done successfully in other games. But then also, I haven't played Bleed 2, which is a game that exists, and it's very possible they've made some of these changes and these refinements. And yeah, because I think, like, the heart of the game is good. It's a good game. It's got nice mechanics. It just needs to decide what it is. Because I think having, like, I love that fast-paced, like, precise platforming that you get in something like Celeste or Super Meat Boy. Absolutely love that. I don't mind the sort of bullet hell style stuff when it comes to something like Binding of Isaac, because, you know, can sort of go almost in that category. I didn't feel like there were many options when it came to the guns that you could have as well. It felt like, unless I totally missed something, you have two guns. You have a pistol and you have a rocket launcher, and you just switch between them. And
sounds right, I think.
And that felt very strange, because there weren't power-ups. There weren't, you know, sort of bigger guns. There weren't different guns that you thought, oh, actually, I've got a laser gun. This can bounce off walls, and that would really help for this section against these enemies. Or, you know, get, so there are things like that I really wanted that you would get in, say, something like R-Type, you know, or any other sort of, like, shoot-'em-up game. Yeah, it's a strange one. It's a strange one. It's, like I said, I'd be interested to play Bleed 2, because if they've taken, if this was like the tech demo, and then Bleed 2 is the game, then it could be something really, really great. But as it is, like, the thing, I think they're relying a lot on the appeal of the game being replay value, arcade, score chasing, which those types of games do not have replay value for me at all. In fact, like, it's not enough of a reason for me to play a game again to see if I can do it better. Like, I'm happy to just tick it off and go, that's done. And I mean, sometimes if it's that fun to play, I'll happily do that, like, you know, Super Monkey Ball or Metroid or something. But the gameplay has to be so unbelievably good that I just want to play it again, first and foremost, and the better score will be a byproduct of that experience.
Yeah.
But I find score chasing just too much of a rabbit hole for my OCD. And because it is a very fine line to try and work out, like, what the actual best score is I can get, and then not stop until I've worked out a way to do that. Or if I get an S rank on one level, then I have to not rest until I've got an S rank on everything. So, I mean, it's, you know, it's similar in the way that I have to temper myself when it comes to freemium games or games with microtransactions. I feel I do a similar thing in score chasing arcade games, where I won't stop until I've completed it, and completing it is obviously a very broad category, depending on what you want that to qualify as.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting, like, when this game came out, it's probably about 10 years old, I would guess. And like I mentioned, it came out on Xbox Live Indie Games. So it was at a time when the Xbox Live arcade boom had started. So this was probably a year or two after Braid, say. It was around the same time as something like Limbo. So the indie thing was happening. But this was then this next phase of indie where it was like single devs. So I'm pretty sure Bleed is made by just one guy. And because it was self-published through this kind of Xbox Live Indie program, I think I probably thought of it really positively at the time because there was a lot of tosh there as well.
Yeah.
I loved sifting through it. I love playing rubbish. But when you found something that was kind of like semi-polished and had kind of a bit of thought behind it, I think by comparison of being alongside things that there was no thought and polish, suddenly something like Bleed was like, "Cool, what a product!"
Yeah,
and I think that elevates it, and it's just interesting to hear you talk about it now because we've had 10 years of unbelievable indie games, really.
Yeah,
like the strongest decade for kind of the games industry as a whole that we've ever had, really, in terms of what's been pumped out. And because I played it at a very different time with very different experiences, you know, something like Dead Cells. Not that that's kind of necessarily my sort of game, but it's something that I couldn't have even imagined 10 years back. And now we have something like that popping out 5 times a week on Steam.
Exactly.
It's just that they're so prevalent.
Yeah, it feels like a developer trying to get the lay of the land. I think, you know, much in the way that like early mobile games or even mobile games do, you know, it's... but then, like, the thing is, like, I don't know why then I like endless runner games, which are essentially score chasing. But the thing about I'm never doing like the best score chasing game. The best endless runner games for me are the ones that just give you like little tasks to tick off, like the Alpha games do, like Jetpack Joyride do, where it's just got something achievable for the next run. And if you get like I said, if you get a better score, that's a byproduct of just enjoying the great gameplay. But I am intrigued to check out Bleed 2.
I've just done some small Googling. It came out 5 years later.
Okay.
Still just the single dev as far as I can tell. But then they haven't made anything since then. So 2017, Bleed 2 came out.
Yeah. Maybe they bleed it out.
Bleed
out? No, it doesn't work, does it?
Possible. But it might be much better. If it had much more kind of thought behind it, there was a much longer runtime, I guess, if it was being worked on and off during that period.
Yeah.
So, yeah. If you do play it, let us all know.
I will do. And I am glad to have played this. It's 42 minutes of my life, and that's absolutely fine.
And you can't have them back. So you've got to make something of it.
So before we wrap up, what is the next Fortnite challenge game going to be?
Oh.
I mean, I'm excited to hear what you're going to set me. I'm excited to set you a game as well. Now, before we do that, we have decided that we are going to alternate challenges between not necessarily modern games, but I'd say certainly games that you could play on a modern console. So something like Machinarium and Bleed are both like 10 years old, but you play it on the Switch or the Steam Deck. But we're going to alternate between games like that and then more retro games, specifically thinking of games you have to emulate to play.
Yeah.
So this next challenge is going to be, we're going to set each other a couple of retro games to play. And Chris, what are you setting me to play?
I am going to give you a Mega Drive twofer of the Disney double pack, essentially. Mickey Mouse in Castle of Illusion.
Yeah.
Because I have a very fond memory of the Master System version of that game. I don't have a huge amount of experience with the Mega Drive version. It just wasn't the one I grew up with. But by all accounts, people like it a lot. And in pairing with that is Donald Duck in Quackshot.
I told you were thinking about plunger guns.
Which I'm very, very fond of. I really, really like that game.
Always thinking about plunger guns.
I think Quackshot is essentially an early Metroidvania.
Interesting.
Because you are updating and upgrading some of your abilities, revisiting areas, unlocking things you couldn't before. It's loose. It's not quite as expansive as something like Super Metroid, but I think you'll probably enjoy that one more than Castle of Illusion. But as a pairing, I think they're a nice sort of chalk and cheese.
Excellent. I'm really, really looking forward to that. I remember renting Castle of Illusion on the Master System and being like, because I remember like seeing coverage of the Mega Drive version and that being like a real like paragon of gaming. Just like, oh my God, this game, Castle of Illusion. And I'm still absolutely blown away by how well a lot of 16-bit platformers hold up. When you look at the likes of like the Sonic games, and obviously Mario games, Donkey Kong Country. It'll be really, really interesting, especially because I had a fairly mixed reaction to when I replayed the Aladdin and Lion King games, which are like Disney ones. Great, thank you. That's going to be that's a real feast.
Good.
It's a real feast. You and your plunger guns.
What have I got?
We're going on the Game Boy Advance.
Yes.
We're going groundbreaking, because I want you to give a superb first-person game a go by the name of X versus 7.
I can't wait. I actually can't wait.
I'm really, really intrigued to hear your thoughts on this game, like properly, because I know we've sort of mentioned it in passing a few times, almost as a bit of a gag. But like you've spoken brilliantly about like the historical importance of games like Doom, and of like your admiration for like the console ports of that game, and like pushing 16-bit, 32-bit hardware, as far as they possibly could. And I really enjoyed X versus 7 when I had it on the Game Boy Advance. A lot of that enjoyment possibly came from its technical prowess as being like the first person handheld game that I had that ran semi decently, outside of Baseball 2000. So yeah, I'm really, really intrigued to see what you think of sort of how it measures up to those classics as a technical achievement of the time, and if you think it's got any value today.
I'm really excited. I mean, I've played a couple levels of it over the years.
Yeah.
That's about all I've ever done. So my biggest memory is watching you play it on an unlit Game Boy Advance in our form room when we were like, 13, 14 years old, whenever you got your Game Boy Advance. So yeah, that'll be a real throwback to just being wee children with far less responsibilities than we have now.
Jesus, yeah. So there we go. Please do join us next. Hang on, I obviously haven't written this.
Of course.
So there we go. That is the closing of our first Fortnite Challenge report. I hope you enjoyed hearing us talk about Bleed and Machinarium, as well as all the other games we've talked about over the last 6 years. No, I'm kidding. Bleed and Machinarium. Next week, we will be continuing our Playdate Odyssey, where we'll be talking about the next 2 games that have released as part of the Season Pass on the Playdate. Boogie Loops and Cranking's Time Adventure. Is that it?
I don't know. I think it's Time Travel Adventure, but I'd have to Google. Hang on. Cranking's...
Yeah. And next week we will be continuing with our Playdate Odyssey, and we'll be giving proper coverage of the next 2 games that have released in the Season Pass, Boogie Loops and Cranking's Time Travel Adventure. Very much looking forward to hearing your thoughts on both of those, Chris, as I am excited to share my thoughts on them with you.
Oh.
And of course, we will be back with the corresponding Fortnite Challenge report in a couple of weeks to let you know how we've got on with X versus 7 and
Disney
Castle
Bonanza.
Illusion and Duck Shot, Quack Shot. Gotta have a fuck shot. If you're enjoying what we're doing, please do consider heading over to our Patreon page, patreon.com/O3C Games. Consider pledging a few pounds our way and enjoy the enormous amount of goodies that you'll get in return for that. Please do check out our website, O3C.games. If you want to throw us a few quid outside of a subscription, you can go to the support page on there and chuck us some money on PayPal. We'd, again, just be hugely appreciative of that. Engage with us on our social media channels. Tell us what you've been playing. Ask us ask us what we think of what you've been playing. Feel free to submit any suggestions for games to challenge the other ones on as well. We'll be more than happy to hear thoughts on those as we progress through this season. We are at O3C Games on everything, or you can target us individually. I am on Twitter at Jonathan Dunn.
And I still live at Chaz_Hodges.
And we will see you back here next time for a play date, please.
Thank you.
Excellent.